It's an honor to meet you.
Thank
Did
you.
a little reading about you, and it blew me away.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, you know that piece the white paper you gave Congress, the Education Committee, that really tells it all. That's on your website.
Yes? Well, it's time that we rethink science education.
Yeah. Well, I was wondering though. There you were the dean of engineering at the engineering school in Tufts, an engineer, but you had already done things at the engineering school that were visionary. And then all of a sudden, 2002, you became the director of the museum. Why did you do that? What happened? What was the mechanics of that?
Well, for years I was passionate about improving science education in schools. But doing the traditional outreach that universities typically do with schools, providing professional development for teachers, developing curricula for children. And in the mid 90s, I had sort of a breakthrough experience. We had invited at the university for lunch one of major philanthropists, brilliant engineer, brilliant, 200 patents in his name, very much interested in education, but he was a difficult guy that sometimes it all comes in a package. And we were making the case for him to endow our science outreach program. And during the pitch, which was actually given by Chris Rogers, one of my colleagues, we stated that science teaches the kids about the world around them. And the donor looked, and that's why we should support science. So the donor got up and he said, really, you think the way we teach science at schools, we accomplish that, teach the kids about the world around them? And Chris, my colleague, said, yes. And the donor said, really? So look at the world around you. And the donor got up and left the lunch. And that started the whole thinking of, are we really teaching kids about the world around them through science? And what we realized is that actually science focuses on the natural world, not on the human-made world. And if you look at the world around us, most of it is human-made. And so we focus on science, which is how explores how the natural world works, and we ignore engineering, which is how the human-made world works. Yet our world is mainly human-made. So we started a whole effort to introduce engineering as an equal to science in schools, starting in kindergarten. And this initiative grew to the point that it needed a platform that could make it national and international. And I had to move in a place where this could be accomplished. And that's why I moved to the museum in 2002.
You call it informal education, informal science education. What is that? That's a pretty broad term because formal is a relatively small piece of the pie. Informal could be anything. Is that what you mean? Anything?
Well, the jargon is that formal education you get in schools. And informal education, you get it in museums, by television, the internet. Not all of this information is necessarily education, but in science centers, for example, science centers focus primarily in informal education, educating the general public, children and adults, on certain science topics. What we have done at the Museum of Science, we have expanded our mission to not only affect informal education, but also formal education. And our goal is to really change the relationship of the public, of the nation, with technology and engineering. And to do that, you have to affect both the general public through our museum and collaborating with museums nationwide, and also through schools. You have to affect the formal education. So all children, as they grow up, understand the natural world and the human-made world.
It's a huge task. I mean, the country's behind, and the public doesn't understand. I mean, in a larger sense. So you're nibbling at a task that is monumental.
It's a huge task, but so that I can give you an idea of the progress we have made, when I moved to the museum in 2003, really. And then at 2004, we really started this initiative at the museum. And back then, we were working with 100 teachers and about 1,000, 2,000 children. Right now, just our programs reach about 36,000 teachers and about 3.5 million children, not only in the United States, but now in a lot of places around the world.
I noticed that. There are no boundaries, no geographical boundaries, no boundaries in demographics. No, you're not limited to Boston. You're everywhere. You're reaching out. I mean, it's really phenomenal how much reach you've achieved in, what, 14 years, 12 years, 10 years, 10 years.
Well, initially, we thought that this initiative would focus in the United States because of competitiveness and all the obvious reasons. But as the initiative grew, of course, a lot of the other countries started figuring out that the United States is changing something significant in science education, including engineering. And they saw the benefits of doing that. So they expressed interest as well. And then we had the dilemma. Do you say, no, I'm not going to work with, let's say, Europe? Or we work with Europe in a way that will be beneficial to both the United States and Europe. If we don't work with Europe, Europe is going to do it its own way anyway. So I'd rather work collaboratively to have a program that works better for Europe and the US than have a competing program in Europe that will accomplish things in Europe and perhaps be in competition with what we do here.
Well, it strikes me that the informal way with a lot of kids, I mean, the kids I know anyway, would be much more appealing to them. They'd rather do it informally than formal. I mean, the kids here in Hawaii, they can be brilliant, They can do amazing things, but they have to have the right environment. It has to be non-threatening. It has to be not so much demanding as evoking a creative spirit. And with that, they do very well. But, compare that with China. Compare that with the test system. You will learn, and this is what you must learn, and we will test you on these things. That's working pretty well in China. There's a lot of engineers in China and doing amazing things. So where does that fit in your view of educating the U.S. and the world?
Mm-hmm. Actually, it's interesting because China now wants to move more in the direction of the U.S. And they want more hands-on activities, open-ended activities for the children in China. And they are interested in our curriculum, as a matter of fact. So let me tell you a little bit about how the curriculum looks at the elementary level, because we have curriculum that we created at the Museum of Science in Boston that spans from kindergarten all the way up to end of high school. So at the elementary level, you have a number of challenges to introduce engineering. The most significant challenge is the fear teachers have about introducing engineering in the classrooms, because most elementary school teachers have limited science background. And imagine now you tell them, along with science, now you have to do engineering, it sounds like a much bigger threat than it truly is, because a lot of them in reality do engineering activities. They call them other things, but they do engineering activities with the children.
What do they say? In every scientist, there's an engineer.
Yeah, but you have to have, and in every engineer there's a scientist. Okay. So it goes both ways. So here is how we developed our elementary curriculum to build on the strengths that teachers have and also make it easier for them to introduce this whole new thing in the classroom. Teachers love storytelling at the elementary school level, and they love teaching children about the world, not only the world around them, but the world in general. And they want to bring in the classroom stories that involve children that look like the children in their classroom. And in every state, as you know now, we have children from all over the world, literally. So our curriculum consists of 20 different stories. And each story features a child from a different part of the world. We have 11 girls featured and 9 boys from all sorts of races, literally throughout the globe, and even children that have physical challenges. We feature a blind child, a deaf child, and a child with Down syndrome, and also a child that's on a wheelchair. And each storybook talks about the child's world. So the little girl from India talks about her village in India, and a challenge her village had, which is quality of drinking water, and how an environmental engineer in her town saved the village by building a filtration system. So this is the beginning. So all of a sudden, the children see a child about their age talking about a real problem. And what we do then is the teacher continues by introducing the science component into the classroom. Now, in this case, the science component is the water cycle. Now, the water cycle, all of us on the 3rd grade, we had the water cycle poster, the raindrop, You can teach it as a dreadful poster topic, or you could bring it to life through saving a village in India. So the teacher then introduces the science component and expands in having the children understand other things environmental engineers do, because they don't only build filtration systems. And then at the end of the unit, the children follow the engineering design process that they learn throughout the unit. And with the kit we provide, they design and build a filtration system with very simple materials. So it's a wonderful way not only to introduce the human-made world, but introduce world culture, having kids see other kids that look like them, being the heroes in the engineering world, but also introduces science in a much more exciting way in the classroom. So this approach has been very successful in allowing teachers to introduce it. Within 3-day training, teachers can be up and running with this. And that's why now there is worldwide interest in this, because our curriculum is international, so it's very easy for a European country or for an Asian country or for a South American country to take the curriculum, because it's not, although it is made in America, it doesn't look and feel like made in America. It feels like it's a world curriculum.
Yeah. You know, I've been doing a movie about the science fair, in here in Honolulu, which was only last week. And looking at it, seeing the way these kids have made their science projects, I keep hearing the drumbeat of one thought, and that is science is really personal. All science begins from a personal point of view. Mm-hmm. Now, maybe you take that really, all science education begins from a personal point of view, but there's always something personal if you are going to link this person up to a notion that will change his life, that will connect him to science, make it real for him, And I think, the museum approach does that. One thing that struck me, though, is that, the old notion of a museum, and I remember seeing a very good museum built in an old powerhouse in Sydney, the Sydney Powerhouse Museum, beautiful place, is that, museums are not like they used to be. Mm-hmm. And certainly your science museum is nothing like, one would hardly call it a museum in the way you describe it. There's so much going on. And I wonder if we could, for the benefit of our viewers, get a handle on how far and wide you go outside the four walls of the museum. You're doing, for example, they come and they sleep under the dinosaurs. That's out of a movie. Mm-hmm. Did the movie come first, or did your idea come first?
No, our idea came first. We had sleepovers at the museum for, I think, 25 years now. Or could even be more, because I hear mothers of children that come and sleep at the museum telling me that they slept under something we had at the museum. So we have a number of programs. The Science Museum in Boston is one of the largest in the world. And there are various rankings, and in all of these rankings, we're ranked close to the top, if not at the top of all science museums. Sometimes the Air and Space Museum in DC ranks higher than us, but one of the criteria they use in the ranking is value you get for your ticket, but they are free, so it's infinite value you can get from the ticket.
It's a mathematics.
Yes. But again, it's a spectacular museum, the DC Air and Space Museum as well. So we get anywhere between 1.5 and 2 million visitors a year from all over the world, of course, primarily New England. And in the traditional museum sort of role we play, not only we try to have engaging exhibits for the visitors that come in the museum, but also auxiliary programs like the spending the night at the museum. We have, I believe, 25,000 children a year and adults spend the night at the museum. Also, we have a very active outreach program. We have a number of vans that take activities to schools and libraries and other places throughout New England. We reach about 100,000 people through these programs. So we have 1.5 to 2 million visitors a year. From this number, about 200,000 are school children that come with schools at the museum. 100,000 we reach through vans. And then we have a number of programs where we partner with science centers to try to introduce engineering in their museum environments. And so indirectly, we reach literally millions of people through our informal and formal science and engineering education activities.
Sorry, I didn't know, but it's really quite extraordinary. I mean, you're creating a whole new world of science education. This is the real deal. Getting kids excited about this, and then reaching out to the whole country. I remember it was maybe 10 years ago when Bill Gates decided he was going to travel around the country and stomp for computer science training. And he didn't find a lot of response. He went to the college campuses. He tried to get them to enroll in computer science courses, and he wound up bringing a lot of people in to Microsoft from outside the country. And Microsoft is populated that way right now. As a high standard, but a lot of them come from outside the country, and we lost ground in computer science somewhere along the line. But this sounds like it will build it up again. I mean, it's in the national interest to do that. So, I mean, you're having an effect on the whole country. Are there other museums cloning you, trying to clone you?
No, we are literally the only museum in the world that has this expanded mission, and I hope that more will follow. Let me make a couple of comments based on what you said. First, you mentioned that science is personal, and by bringing the personal element makes it exciting. Engineering is even more personal because in science, you really are trying to discover something in the natural world, which is exciting and important. But in engineering, you start from a real human need. I want an alarm that would ring if my little brother breaks into my room, which is sort of a real need,
That's perfect.
which is much more personal for a 12-year-old than a certain kind of leaf that grows in the Amazon, which again, it's important, but it's much more personal. So by introducing engineering in the classroom and linking science through engineering, it becomes far more personal and interesting for children than the traditional science approach. Let's learn about the rainforest now that most kids have never seen and will never see a rainforest. What was the second point? You just mentioned something.
Bill Gates and computer science.
Yes.
training.
Oh, yeah. The computer science. So here is what my theory is about computer science. If you look at engineering, interest in engineering and engineering enrollments and how they progressed over the years, and I read a study at one of the trade magazines of one of the engineering professional organizations. So this is not sort of a scientifically vetted process, but what I read is over the last 10 years, enrollment in engineering schools increased by, I think, 12%, while in computer science, it declined. And typically, engineering and computer science enrollments parallel each other because they're driven by demand on the technological kind of jobs. The only thing that has changed these 10 years is now we have engineering into K-12 schools, but we don't have computer science. So my theory is that if we want to have more computer science candidates to fill jobs in Microsoft and Google and all the other Intel, all the other companies, the only way we're going to do it is if we have exactly the same approach we have with engineering, have both informally and formally computer science introduced into people's lives. So as part of our long-term strategy, although we're still working on the engineering initiative, is to use the same process in computer science, develop exhibits and programs that spark the interest of the general public in computer science, and then have creative curriculum in school that goes along with that. And how do you make computer science exciting? A lot of the stuff that kids love are driven by computer science. But what do they think drives video games? Art. Animation, art. Well, there is art in animation, but it's really computer science. So having, let's say, an exhibit on video game design or an exhibit on animation that makes the case that this is an exciting world, you got to be a computer science to do it. That sparks the interest. But then you have to have school programs and curricula that kids could take to really deepen that interest, and then choose computer science as a discipline.
It's like your example of the boy who wants to build an alarm that will keep his brother out of the room. Well, he could build an alarm with code,
Exactly.
Or you could have the graphic over here, the animation over there, and the page of code over here. Change one number, everything over here changes.
Mm-hmm.
You can see the cause and effect that way.
Sure.
It would be. I agree with you, and I don't know if it happens, but it should happen. That it's not just a small percentage of the population, but every kid should understand those cause and effect relationships and the power. Right now we're involved in a broadband initiative here to try to get up to 1 gigabit. and we're trying to teach the public that there is a difference, and that the world doesn't end at 5 megabits. And that's a hard road to hoe. People don't understand. But if there were some sort of education that would make the whole community, alert on these issues, that would be better. And I think I understand your strategy on involving all ages and parents as well as children, because if the parents know more, whether they know as much and whether their knowledge is as internalized, they will encourage their kids to do something.
Let me give you an example of how we set up an exhibit that does that. We are trying to make engineering an equal to science in our museum, and we're a very much hands-on museum. We have artifacts, exciting things for people could see, but also want them to get personally involved. So one of our engineering exhibits is the design challenges, which is a place where we give visitors a specific challenge and the tools and materials, simple things, that they spend about half hour to solve the challenge, and then they compete with each other. And primarily the participants are children. But next to that exhibit, we have the Creative Engineers exhibit that the Gordon Foundation provided. And there we feature 6 very innovative engineers with videos of how they became engineers, what they're working now. And so the way we set it up is, while the children are working on their design challenge exhibit, the parents are usually hanging around the Innovative Engineers exhibit. And they see what engineering is, what engineering does, how engineering changes the world in a positive way. So then, after the kids did the challenge and they got the sticker that says, "I engineered today," there is a follow-up conversation about actually what real engineers do in the car or in the cafeteria. Yeah. And we have seen this working very well.
I love that. So you get it at both ends, and at the end of the day, it's that conversation in the car.
Exactly.
Or the vocational, the career planning that takes place at the dinner table. And this probably has a big effect on both sides of that discussion.
Exactly. And in the United States, we have a big problem because 72% of U.S. engineers have had a relative that's an engineer. So unless you have a relative, the probability of becoming an engineer is very small, because we use in the United States, we use the term engineer for people that drive trains and repair things, janitors, all sorts of things that are really not engineering. And the television gives wrong messages too, because if you look at the heroes in primetime network TV, are primarily physicians, doctors, forensic scientists. The only engineer, I think, in primetime TV is Homer Simpson right now. So this is the image of engineering. So unless a kid has a relative that's an engineer, she will never find out about engineering and won't do it. So we have to use other ways to introduce engineering into their lives, schools and museums.
Maybe that's a project you could put on your list, a primetime show in which the hero is an engineer.
Well, it's great, but, primetime shows are being driven by advertisers and this and that. It's not as simple to do then.
So, how big a staff do you need to have this much influence and range? It sounds like the museum has legions of people out there creating this effect.
Well, it's more creating a system than hiring thousands of staff. So here's how we're organized. The Museum of Science houses the National Center for Technological Literacy, which is sort of an umbrella organization that tries to introduce engineering in our museum and other museums, and also in schools.
But it emanates out of the museum.
Out of the museum. So our major initiatives in the museum world is to introduce exhibits and programs in our museum. And our biggest project in introducing engineering in other museums is a nanotechnology informal science network we have. It's the biggest grant that the National Science Foundation has ever given to a museum. We're on the second round of funding for a total funding of $43 million. And so we lead a network of museums. Our major partners are the Exploratorium and the Science Museum in Minnesota. But there are hundreds of other museums participating, where our main goal is to introduce the nanotechnology world to the general public. And the reason the National Science Foundation made such a big investment is they preferred that the world learns about nanotech from us than from science fiction movies, which is what happened with biotech, and now there's all this paranoia about biotech.
Yeah.
So these are the two major initiatives in the museum world. Now, for schools, the way we have set up the system, we do three things. We do advocacy, and basically part of what I'm doing today is with you is advocacy.
Yeah, sure.
I give lectures throughout the world, and I was in Israel 2 weeks ago. I was in Vermont the day before yesterday, and basically to make the case of why engineering is important for schools. And our model is to convince departments of education in each state or ministers of education in other countries to introduce engineering as an equal to science into schools.
Can I stop you there for a moment? So you would go anywhere. You would go anywhere, and you would advocate for science in the schools. What is the global interest of that? If I could connect that up.
The whole thing started, as I mentioned to you, as a U.S. initiative.
Yeah.
But as you know, the world is flat, so and there are a lot of smart people outside of the U.S. So the moment we started this whole initiative, and other countries saw that now the United States is including engineering, let's say, in the next generation science standards, then they started wondering, is that a good thing for us? And of course, the answer is yes, it's a good thing for them. So then we're sort of in a dilemma. Do we focus only in the U.S., our effort, or we are the primary drivers worldwide? And we chose the latter because it is going to happen worldwide, and I'd rather be the primary driver than lose the opportunity.
As you mentioned, and assuming that's the case, then you have, hypothetically, every country, the kids, the parents in every country are more science aware. So you have a more science aware world.
And more responsible world, because if you understand,
part of it, then. If
exactly.
you understand, then you're more responsible with it. You're not paranoid with it. You presumably use it for good rather than bad purpose.
And also there are environmental issues. I'd rather be the world driver of good engineering than let it run on its own, and then we have no control over it.
But what about teaching the people of Iran more about nuclear energy? Sorry.
Well, no. Our goal is to make people technologically literate so they can make good decisions. And you can learn about nuclear energy and develop wonderful systems that save lives in hospitals through radiation therapies and produce clean energy. Although there are issues with nuclear waste, but it's much cleaner than many other ways to do it. They can use it this way, or they can use it building nuclear weapons like not only Iran, but the United States and China and Russia have built.
Don't forget Korea.
But nonetheless, I think there is a much more higher risk if people don't understand science and technology and the risk and the benefits of technologies than leaving it up to ignorant people, including a lot of politicians that do not have science and engineering backgrounds, making bad decisions that could destroy the world.
So part of this educational program is the responsibility part. Part of it is the ethics. Mm-hmm. Part of it is the distinguishing good and bad use.
I always believe that good education can only do good, and it doesn't. And good education should not be a parochial thing. If it's good education and people really understand the world, chances are there are going to be better decisions happen than bad decisions happen. And we see bad decisions happen in this country simply because people are ignorant. There's not enough information. There's paranoia. There is fiction about things that drive major political decisions.
Oh, there's a bill pending in a state in the South right now to, outlaw teaching of Mendelian. I'm blocking on the name.
Evolution or
evolution?
Yeah.
Outlaw evolution. Discussion of evolution goes back to the Scopes trial. Goes back 100 years easily, and it is a path to ignorance right now. And so it leads me to ask you the question. I mean, here, just limiting into the United States for a moment, there are pockets of places in the United States which would presumably resist science, which would say, we know how to do this. We'll just do it our own way. We don't want to hear about new systems. We don't want to hear about STEM. We have a fish to fry, and it's not in our little world. I mean, do you find resistance like that, and how do you cope with it?
Well, our main activity is focused on introducing engineering. And in engineering, you start with a human need, and you pull together your science background, math, imagination, art, to really come up with a solution that satisfies the need. And all humans, regardless of religious beliefs, have needs, and they expect solutions for these needs. So we have not really met resistance because we don't deal with Adam and Eve and these sorts of issues. So fortunately, this has not been an impediment in our initiative.
Good. So what about the notion of STEM itself? I mean, in Hawaii schools, STEM is kind of an option, but it's not required in the curriculum. And I think I saw in your materials and in museum materials that the idea would be to make STEM ubiquitous in every school, in every curriculum. But there must be places where there's resistance on that. No?
Well, at the end of the day, you want to make sure when kids graduate from high school that they are prepared for life, either to enter workforce or to go to some sort of continuing education, higher education. And how can you claim that you're a literate citizen at age 18 if you don't understand how the natural world works around you and how the human-made world is made? I cannot think of anything more important than that, aside of being a good citizen overall. And even to be a good citizen, you have to understand all that. So you respect the natural environment, you understand how the human-made world is made and how the two can coexist. So ignoring science and engineering is silly. And I cannot even see of other disciplines that would be more important on that. Of course, you need math, and of course, you need to be able to read and write. These are basic things. But I think science and engineering, or I believe, are as important as math and reading and writing, understanding the world and making sure that you won't do damaging things and hopefully know enough to improve the world around you.
And have your community succeed in a world in which, there's science and technology all around. I mean, that's the issue in Hawaii, to make Hawaii, to connect it up and make sure it doesn't get to be a backwater, make sure that it's keeping up with Asia, keeping up with the United States. That's why Galen Ho and, the See It organization admires what you're doing so much. And I'd like to talk about that for a minute because what you're doing is something that is really great stuff for us, for Hawaii. And if we could do anything like that, even on a small basis, it would be hugely beneficial, especially, the way we're situated right now. So how do we get to be a franchise for you?
Well, you can do it in much easier ways than most states have done it. And here's why. It's because of the size of Hawaii and the fact that you have one school district for the entire state. And also you have, I believe, a pretty well-coordinated private parochial school network here. So in order to make, and also Hawaii is, I would say, almost unique in the United States, that your natural world is huge compared to Massachusetts, which of course there's natural world everywhere, but here your natural world, you have volcanoes, you have amazing vegetation, you have ocean, you have so much stuff. It's much richer. Your natural world, the natural world for the children here is a bigger piece of the pie. So focusing on STEM versus just science or ignoring science, is a much better approach, and your whole world here is a natural and human-made world laboratory. So here's how you could do it. Through your science centers or activities or museums, if you focus on having people understand how the technology is made, through your initiatives and other museum initiatives, that would educate the general public about the human-made world, and particularly the human-made world that's created by Hawaiian industry here. And also, you could change your learning standards in the public schools and influence in parallel the parochial and private schools to include engineering as an equal to science. There are new standards that are being developed at the federal level now, the next generation science standards, that are filled with engineering. A lot of it has to do with our efforts. And if Hawaii decides to go along with a federal, they're not called federal standards, but really they are national standards, then engineering will be part of the kids' curriculum.
When you say engineering, you mean STEM or you just mean engineering?
Well, STEM is science, technology, engineering, mathematics. Yeah. Science and mathematics are already in place. Technology Most people use it for educational technology, computers. So engineering is really the new thing you have to introduce. So you cannot have STEM without engineering. It's smooth, there's no STEM. And if you leave technology and engineering out. So, but engineering is the new thing that you really need to introduce, because computers are there, science is there, math is there. So if you introduce engineering, then you have STEM. Right now you don't have STEM, you have STEM. So,
Okay.
not even two, because the technology is sort of. So, so that's how I would do it in Hawaii. And because it's one school district, you don't have to go to 365 to convince like you have in Massachusetts. You go to one. And if the leadership, the educational leadership wants it to happen, it could happen fairly easily.
Well, they do want it to happen, and there is leadership, and the leadership comes in part from Senator Dan Inouye, who is a very powerful person in the state. So if he's able to exert his view of the matter, and if the Department of Education, which is monolithic in the state, buys into that, and I think it is buying into that, then we will have this. So what is the next step? To me, the ultimate step for Hawaii, this may not be the case everywhere, but the ultimate step for Hawaii is to create a sustainable, productive, creative tech industry, and have these kids stay here instead of leave. And I don't know how you get there from adopting STEM in the schools to having kids that are so interested that they not only study science, but they congregate. They have a confluence, the critical mass, and then there's an industry. How do you do that?
Well, you make sure that there is enough support by industry and state and through your senator, hopefully federal support, for introducing engineering in the informal science world. Your television, your local TV,
The media.
the media, and the science centers and the science type centers, and also have the Department of Education adopt engineering standards that would be in parallel with the science standards, and provide assessments, because if it's not tested, it's not going to happen. And then provide professional development for teachers from kindergarten all the way to grade 12 to empower them and give them the tools to teach engineering in the classroom. The materials you need to do that are not that expensive. It's professional development and commitment at the state level. Once you have engineering in school, starting in kindergarten, along with science and mathematics, then you'll start creating the interest on children and have the parental support because of the media and the science centers that would encourage more kids to go in this direction. And that's how you could make it happen.
By the way, just a point. I mean, it's part of this, as you see it, introduction of computer programs, like I think his name is Khan, Khan University. And he does everything online. It's part of this process. New, more powerful, better developed computer programs to teach.
Are you talking about distance learning sort of modules?
Could be distance learning, could be right there, could be at night. There's one school of thought where you have the interaction at night online, and you have the study during the day, where they sit in the classroom and anything to get the job done. But no, not necessarily distance learning, although it could be. We could be a center for distance learning in the whole Pacific. But wherever it goes, the idea of having a lot of the material right on the computer in interactive, teaching modules.
There is definitely value and opportunity to using the digital world to expand educational activities. You could do simulations that you couldn't do in the past. You could reach vast number of people. You could have communities built digitally. However, you cannot replace everything by that, because human-to-human interaction is still important. Most of us are doing what we're doing because of a teacher that touched our hearts or our brains in a particular way. And that personal touch, starting from kindergarten, going all the way up to college, I don't think could be replaced by computers and synchronous or asynchronous learning. Also, building something that works has a totally different meaning than doing it on the computer in a simulating. Making something that turns, something that works, is something you cannot replace. So I would say that some of the things we do could be done equally or better sometimes using computers, but some things still have to be done on a one-on-one basis and using our hands.
It strikes me that what you have to do to commit these kids to a life of science is you have to make them love the science. You have to make it personal. It has to emanate from some personal feeling. You have to inculcate that into them, and then you have to, what's the old notion? I've heard this many times. Is what scientists love more than anything else is to talk about their science.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to give them a place, a crucible where they can discuss this freely. No problems about, protected IP or anything. Just talk about their work. And it sounds to me like you have a number of things to do, beyond just the training to create the industry. We tried, Act 221, very famous act here. It was a tax incentive, a tax credit that incentivized startups by young people. And for a while, it actually did that. But then the legislature, in its wisdom, decided not to do it anymore. But I think you need a whole continuum, don't you? I mean, in a one location thing. In other words, if I want to teach him science, he has the world as his oyster. But if I want to teach him science and have him enter an industry in a specified location, my job is more difficult.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, first you have the general interest to be there. So you got to have the kids motivated to learn science and engineering and mathematics. You have to have the parents to encourage them to do that, understand the value of having a career in this area. And then you have to do it in a way that there is an obvious path for the children that study science here and go to the university here or elsewhere to see that Hawaii is a good place to actually practice science and engineering. And this all has to be clear, especially for children that would live here, go to university in Seattle, and then they have to think to go back home from Seattle, where the industry is right at their footstep over there. So having industry being active participants in the creation of engineering standards, having industry provide interesting opportunities for teachers maybe over the summer, that then the teachers could talk about all the exciting things that are happening in the industry here in Hawaii to children and spark the interest of children, especially ones that are going to go to university here, to stay here because they see obvious paths. This is how you would create an environment where you first have enough kids interested in it, they go to college and they continue being interested in it, and there's a logical connection between studying science, engineering, and then coming back home because there are opportunities here and in this wonderful place.
A standard career path where you do this, you go to Seattle, whatever, and you come back. It's part of a career path.
And it happens. When I used to teach at Tufts, we used to get a lot of students from India and China for graduate school. It was almost unheard of that any of these students would want to go back home. And now, many of them, if not all, end up going back home. Why? Because there are obvious opportunities to go back home, and you can live a great life being a scientist and an engineer in China now. It didn't used to be. So if Hawaii presents itself in a similar way, you're in paradise here. Why wouldn't anybody want to come and live here?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's right on. We have a few minutes left, and I'd like to talk about money. When you were at Tufts, you did miraculous things raising money for Tufts. That was notable. As notable as bringing more women into engineering, as I remember, another thing, which is important here too.
Mm-hmm.
But money is a problem. Money is a problem for, developing a tech industry and then backing up to, do science education. Money is a problem, I'm sure, in making a national global museum as you have. What's the secret? I really don't know. Other people maybe, but I don't know. And I wonder if you could tell us the role that it plays and how you get it, how you get commitments, how you get government, how you get private funders. How do you do that?
To tell you the truth, I never had to worry about money, not just for myself, but for my initiatives at least. And what I have found is if you have a good concept, you are focused, and you show progress and results, money comes. Because if you look at the funding sources, the federal government is always looking for innovative ways to solve big problems. And if you look at the money we have spent in science education, it's billions of dollars. If you look at the results, because what do we do with the money? We keep putting more money to teach better kids how 2% of the world around them works. They're not interested in that, no matter how much money you spend. And yes, in Hawaii you have volcanoes, and volcanoes are very interesting. But if you live in New York City, a volcano that kids spend a month learning how it works has no relevance in their lives. So, and I'm not saying don't teach volcanoes, but the whole curriculum has to be rethought, and money has to be spent on things that would truly make a fundamental change in the interest of kids and the education of kids. So the federal government, the funding agencies, are staffed by very bright people. So if the right concept is there, you get federal money. At the state level, if you want to build a technologically literate citizenry, then you can spend your professional development of teachers doing X thing, or you could focus them in learning how to teach engineering for children. So you can redirect money and solve the problem. Also, industry. You have a lot of money spent by industry to fund education, this, education, that, but it's not focused. You have major corporations funding things that have nothing to do in improving the possibility of having kids enter their profession. So if you focus even existing, it doesn't have to be new money, focusing existing money in really introducing in a focused way STEM into schools, then in particular engineering into schools, then you're going to start seeing significant results without huge infusion of funds. It has to be coordinated and focused though.
So does that mean that you can, if you focus the money, I mean, at the receiving end, then you can go back to the funder and say, look, you know, we did good with this, so why don't you change your pattern and you focus, you know, your contribution just the same way?
Exactly, and also funders need to see results, even results from other places that did the same thing, and also once you introduce it in your environment, see results here. So what we try to do for every activity we have, we try to measure results and effects, and it becomes public information. And in different states, in different countries, it will have different effects. But overall, if you see that we introduced, for example, we did a study of how our elementary engineering curriculum affected kids in wealthy districts and poor districts. And we saw that the improvement in attitude toward science and technology and actually performance of kids, they improved much more significantly in the poor district than in the rich district, which I wasn't that surprised, actually, because in the wealthy districts, you have the parental support, kids study physics because, of course, at home the message is you should study physics, and it's regardless what you think about physics. But in a poor district, it's a different situation. So by introducing engineering, kids that did not have that parental push for education thought that science is cool, and this is something I'm interested in, and that's why you saw the much more dramatic increase. So when funders see things like that, because funders want kids from all backgrounds to consider going in these areas, they love it and they give you money. And that's why we have not had a problem with funding, because of the projects we picked to do and the results that the projects generated.
So there's two sources. I mean, maybe I'm missing something, but one is government money and one is private money. What's more important? Where do you spend your time in terms of best bang for your best buck for your bang?
Well, federal money is typically bigger money.
Is it? Okay.
Because you can get big block grants. You have millions of dollars spent on education, and there is never enough money. But the decision is, how do you spend your money always? Is it worth having small classes or having maybe bigger classes and have engineering in the classes? I mean, this is a decision that the school system can make and shift resources and make it happen. And I'm not saying one is better than the other, but there is always the trade-offs you could make. But in reality, the big money are federal money and state money for education. On the other hand, having industry money is significant because it could be not as politically driven where the money is spent, because you could say, we want to give money for this. And if you want to take it, if not, don't. Versus when it comes to federal and state money, you have all sorts of political considerations and pressures. The second is by having industry giving money, you have industry being interested in the education process, which is also very important.
And it is self-interested for them. They want to have better graduates.
Exactly, and then you involve the employees of the companies into this whole in appropriate ways. Not everybody that is a great engineer can be a great teacher, because being a teacher it's a skill in its own. But being a good engineer, you could be a good supporter in helping a teacher teach better. So both sources are significant, and that's why we're always go after both.
Well, when you came into the museum, I'm sure that one of the early steps was, governance and sort of connecting up with the trustees and making everything work properly. In this case, there is no science museum here, although see it has an exhibit. That's a long way from a museum. And I wonder what your advice would be in terms of establishing that board of trustees here in a fresh, carte blanche.
Well, you don't necessarily need a museum. You could have the exhibit you have, and affect the Bishop Museum to have more of an engineering flavor, and maybe work in partnership. Mm-hmm. But also you could have a council you could pull together that really champions this new way of introducing science, through engineering or engineering into schools. Could be a statewide initiative with a board. You can have a separate nonprofit, or you could have your exhibit non-for-profit sort of entity run it, where you could set clear goals to change the relationship of the Hawaiians with engineering. And we'll do that through television, we'll do that through museums, and through exhibitions, and we'll do that through affecting curriculum in schools. And set some goals. And because, again, of your more centralized nature in schools and the size of your state, it could happen much faster than it can happen in other states.
We're working for that. So my last area I want to talk about is the future, because it sounds like, even in recent years, the museum, have set some things in motion. I don't know if you've had the success, the immediate success, or whether this is more of an intermediate or long-term process to achieve the goals. But I'm wondering what you think will happen going forward, not only in the United States but elsewhere. What will we see based on your experience to date?
Of course, I have a biased, optimistic approach about this whole thing. This is my life mission. But based on the significant progress that has been made in a relatively short period of time, and seeing how engineering now is becoming not only part of the curricula in schools, not only standards, but you have President Obama talking about engineering. Just last year, there were 2 hearings on K-12 engineering education in the Senate. Things are happening. Just the fact that I was in Israel 2 weeks ago, and the Department of Education, the Ministry of Education there, sent almost all their middle-level people in the ministry and the 2 chief scientists and science educator in industry to talk with me to find out about this whole engineering initiative is promising. And there is interest worldwide. So I really think that if we continue in the United States the way we are, the U.S. could be the leading country in introducing kids in the world of engineering within 5 years. And if we continue moving aggressively in this direction, we could be the world leaders for years to come in this, since this whole initiative started here. If we drop the ball, which is possible, you never know. With the change in administration, you never know if there is what things happen. If we drop the ball, we're going to lose, because it's going to happen worldwide. And it's going to be yet one more time that the great initiative started in the United States, and because of mishandling on our part, we lost in the long run. But so far, so good. The U.S. is the leading country in engineering education for children. We have the entities here that are driving this initiative, and we could really be at the forefront of STEM education. We were not in science. We have lived in science, but this is a new thing, and in my mind could even be more powerful and important than the science part.
Well, so what's the next step? I mean, you start with a museum, and then you go way outside the brick and mortar of the museum. You go into a concept, an educational concept that goes everywhere. What's the next step? Maybe there are other museums that do that too. maybe what's your vision for your own initiative?
Actually, that's something that you asked me before, and then we drifted in a different direction. Is how many staff members you have to do that. So to accomplish an initiative, the results you want, an initiative like that, you cannot do it just in one institution unless you have thousands of people working for you, which is not going to happen. So we depend on partnerships. So we do our advocacy pretty much by ourselves, but then we train other institutions to advocate. Like, let me take the Israel situation. We are working with the Bloomfield Science Center in Jerusalem. They are going to pick up the ball in Israel. In New Jersey, we have the Stevens Institute of Technology that is driving it. And I could go in Orlando, we have the Orlando Science Center. So we have partners throughout the world that we train on how to advocate, then we help them advocate and get resources, and then they become the champions at the local level, getting the credit and being visible. And also, on the professional development of teachers, again, we create hubs where we train the trainers, and then they work with the teachers. Like in Europe, we have 10 partners in 10 different countries that they provide professional development for teachers. So that's how you can accomplish scale. So the way I see the initiative happening is moving in the same direction, doing advocacy at many levels now worldwide versus nationwide, continue with curriculum development aggressively like we are. We have products from K through 12, and we're expanding our venues, motivating other entities to create curricula. Remember, our goal is not to sell our books. Our goal is to introduce engineering for children, and we understand that for that to happen, you have to have many players creating materials. And the third thing is creating networks for professional development that could span worldwide. And this is how we're going to get where we want to get.
So you would consider a partnership, a relationship with Hawaii?
Of course, and that's why I'm here.
It's wonderful. It's great to talk to you.
Thank you. Great to
Thank
talk
you
to
so
you.
much.
Thank you.